What is tokenized gold? Today we're going to talk about one asset that is considered money by many since the beginning of time that may be making a comeback in terms of its use in not only currencies but in the global bond market.
There is a challenge that is coming from digital currencies such as blockchain technologies.
So I think it's important to share that anything can be tokenized.
All the money.
I like the idea of a gold standard. I mean, it could be used in a very cryptocurrency way.
Very much sooner than a lot of people understand or think. We will be all at a level playing field.
Hey, welcome to the show. Today we're going to talk about tokenized gold. So we're going to cover quite a list of things today, namely that gold is a physical asset. And in this world of tokenization and money, it's sometimes referred to and labeled as a real world asset. So you'll see the acronym RWA sometimes in this context. And what that does is it separates digital tokens that are native to a blockchain, like a Bitcoin or an XRP or even Ethereum, Ether. Those are digital assets that are used to exchange value that don't really have a physical world counterpart. And there's plenty of other videos. We'll talk about those things another day. Today we're going to talk about is this idea of tokenization, and I'm going to link in the video another video I did kind of a macro level about tokenization. But the tokenization of real world assets, and in this case we're going to talk specifically about gold. And what this means is someone has a pile of gold, a bunch of gold, and they are going to issue a digital asset that represents the ownership rights of that gold. Because if you think about the blockchain, it's computer code, software code that lives on a variety of different computers, many of them in most cases, and it records the transactions associated with the property rights of that asset. What that means is that when you own something, let's say you own a bicycle, what that means is you have certain rights connected to that physical item. If I own a bicycle, I have the right to ride it around. I have the right to sell it. I have the right to lease it to someone. Like someone could pay me to borrow it. I have the right to fix it up. I have the right, if I wanted to destroy it. So that's what ownership of something entails, is a set of different property rights connected to that asset. And, those rights are going to differ depending on the actual asset itself. Like a house has a set of property rights associated with it. They're going to be different than gold. For example, one of the rights of owning a home is I can live in it. Obviously, you don't live in gold. So they're going to differ by asset. Now, gold is important in this era of history that we live in because we are seeing globally a problem with inflation. If you've been to the store or bought anything in the last couple of years, you may have noticed that the prices of things have gone up a lot. So what does that mean? Globally, a lot of people are losing faith in the fiat currency system because there has been such an oversupply of money printed. And it doesn't seem like there's any concern about that on the part of many world leaders, which is kind of shocking and disturbing to watch. And so in history, when global reserve currencies have kind of gone up and gone down, there's often this period where consumers or the sort of citizens of the world lose trust in the issuer of the fiat money that's become inflated. And there's a return to sound money. In this case, gold is sort of the most quintessential asset that is used. But I think in this new era, we're going to see a lot of other assets be used as money. We'll talk about that in a future video. But today we're going to talk about one of the assets that will likely be used in our new monetary system, and that is gold. And before we kind of get into a lot of the nuances here, this is kind of a controversial topic at times, and I actually posted a thread or an infographic and a post on LinkedIn and got some heat from some Bitcoin supporters, Bitcoin maxis we call them, because they often believe that anytime you take these physical assets and you represent them on the blockchain, there's the opportunity for corruption and deception and whatnot. So what I'm going to talk about is what I've learned so far about how the gold tokenization process could work. And the other thing that is key to understand here is I didn't make this idea up. Okay, central banks and countries around the world have been stockpiling gold for many, many years. And if gold was really this outdated, worthless relic, why would they do that? And many of these central banks are required to disclose what they buy and what they hold. So they've had to tell us, the citizens of the world, that gold is taking on a new role. And in 2019, I think it was 2009, the Bank of International Settlements, which is sometimes referred to as the central bank of central banks, relabeled gold as a tier 1 asset, which means essentially that it is considered money in the banking world. Banks have to hold money in reserves, capital in reserves, and gold is now considered the highest quality, meaning like for what we consider $1 million worth of gold, they're able to do things that would require $2 million of another asset like real estate. So gold is now considered money by the banking system. We're seeing these nations and central banks stockpiling gold. And the question is, why would they do that if there wasn't going to be a role for gold in the future? So let's, for argument's sake, say that's going to happen, so that we can understand the nuances of what that really means. So the first thing to understand is that gold is one of the assets that are physical assets called real world assets that will be represented on the blockchain via this process called tokenization, which means the various property rights associated with owning gold are what is represented on the blockchain. There are two primary types of uses for tokenized gold that we're going to talk about today. One is as a currency. If you have studied any kind of monetary history at all, you might know that back in the day, many countries, including the United States, were on the gold standard, which means that gold backed the money supply, which in theory meant if you had $1,000 worth of dollars, you should be able to go and redeem them for gold if you wanted to do that. That's what it means to be backed, that there's a bunch of gold sitting somewhere and there's this paper that's issued kind of as a placeholder for that gold. And if I wanted to, I could go and redeem my dollars for gold. But gold is heavy and people don't really want to walk around carrying it. If you're going to buy something expensive, you're going to have to walk around these giant piles of gold. It was impractical for gold to be used itself, so currency became a placeholder. Now, there's problems that happen. We'll talk about those in a second, but if that is what we're referring to here with a gold-backed currency, it means that the issuer of the currency, which let's just say it's a central bank for right now, they have a supply of gold. They then can issue currency up to the amount of gold that they have, and theoretically, they would offer the opportunity to redeem that currency for gold as a way to establish trust. So one of the challenges with the fiat system is that they can print all this money and it's not really backed by anything other than the faith and credit of a government, which if they don't exercise any fiscal responsibility, meaning they just spend whatever they want to spend, that causes a loss of confidence in the money supply. All right, the second thing that is related is the bond market. So when nations around the world hold their wealth in dollars, that's a little bit misleading. What's actually happening is that nations and central banks and large participants in the global trade market hold their profit in U.S. treasuries, which are bonds. Bonds are loans. So when we talk about U.S. treasuries here, the U.S. government loans you money. You loan the U.S. government money, and they agree to not only pay you back, but they'll pay you back with interest. They're considered to be a very, very safe, generally, form of investment. Up until recently, like for most of my lifetime, bonds were considered like a very boring, safe investment that had a fairly low return. So, you're not going to get super rich off of the bond market. Anyway, I digress. Okay, so if we're going, let's say hypothetically, we're going to move back to a world where we have gold-backed currencies. What does that mean for the bond market? We would also need to move to gold-backed bonds. And they function similarly in that you would have a pile of gold, and you could say, all right, I'm going to borrow money from people, organizations, entities, whatever, and I'm going to promise to pay them back. And I'm pretending to be a government right now. I'm going to promise to pay this money back. And if for some reason I can't, then I will give you my gold to pay you back. So again, it's kind of backing a loan. It's using gold as collateral to borrow money from people. And why do governments borrow money? They got to pay for stuff, and it's part of expanding the economy and part of trade. And so we could likely see a shift from the fiat bond market to gold-backed bonds. There's been quite a bit of chatter around this. India's already issued some sovereign bonds, gold-backed bonds. We've seen other countries do this as well. And there's a great opportunity for this to be done on the blockchain, because that means that the exchange of value, meaning like I'm going to invest in a country's bonds, meaning I'm going to give them money, and then they're going to give me some kind of certificate or document that indicates, it's like my receipt basically, that I've purchased this bond. And that can all be done by the blockchain via kind of a digital asset. I'll say I pay you in a XRP, or I pay you in Bitcoin, or I pay you in a stable coin like USDC. And then the issuer of the bond, the borrower, would then send me back probably an NFT or another kind of digital asset token that represents that bond. It's actually a good segue into talking about fungible and non-fungible. There are two fundamental types of digital assets, and they're going to fall into this tokenization concept as well. The idea of fungible is that you have a whole bunch of digital assets, there isn't any difference between them. The perfect example of fungibility is paper currency, that, if I have a $20 bill and you have a $20 bill and we swap them, like no one would really care, because for all intents and purposes, they are the same. And a lot of digital assets are the same. For example, if you wanted to buy a Bitcoin, you don't really care which Bitcoin. Like there isn't anything unique about one Bitcoin for another. And in the world of money, currencies, where you're using money to, barter or exchange for goods and services, we don't really want there to be something unique about each individual bill. Now, in this world of gold-backed currency, there very well may be a mechanism in place to tie a particular bill to some kind of gold, just to prove that they aren't like printing money out of nothing. But for our use as the spender of that money, there wouldn't be any difference between, one $20 that's gold-backed and another $20 bill that's gold-backed. So that's the idea of fungibility, is that they're all basically the same, so you can mix them up and it doesn't really matter. Non-fungible simply means unique. A great example of a non-fungible token, we'll call it, in the regular world, is a airline ticket. So if I get on a flight, I have to be on the right flight, the right time. I want my seat. Like there's all these unique things about my airline ticket that makes it non-fungible. So like, for example, if I'm about to go get on a flight, I'm not going to go switch tickets with some random person in the airport, because I need that unique plane ticket. Now, there is actually a middle ground called semi-fungible. This would be an example, using my airline analogy, of like Southwest Airlines, where you get on a plane, but you can pick any seat. So there will be a whole bunch of tickets where they're all kind of the same, right? The Delta shuttle, if they still have it anymore, from New York to Boston, I used to fly on that. That was the same idea. You'd have a plane ticket. You could get on any flight at any time and sit anywhere you wanted. But it was only good for Delta and only good for those two locations. So again, it was semi-fungible. I couldn't go anywhere in the world with this plane ticket, but in my little microcosm of flying from New York to Boston, I could swap it. Now, going back to gold, there are probably going to be non-fungible examples where if I'm going to hold my wealth, like a store of value, in gold, I might want to know that like there are a set of specific bars of gold with ID numbers sitting in a vault that are being watched, and those correspond specifically to an NFT that I hold that refers to that particular gold bar. It might be a really big gold bar, very expensive one, and so it's important to me that what I hold represents a specific gold thing. I'm going to do a separate video on tokenized diamonds, but one of the things that I found in my research on that is a diamond broker is taking like a bunch of diamonds that are of differing like quality and grades, and they're kind of packaging them in a set. And that set becomes like a non-fungible NFT that you could buy a bunch of these diamonds, like of a mix of different grades, and that sort of packages one thing. So regarding the tokenized gold idea, there will be money that is fungible and can be interchangeable. And there probably will be non-fungible things like gold-backed bonds, where you get a receipt that is unique. Maybe there's a date on it that that you hold it for a certain amount of time. Or I could have specific bars of gold that are coded, ID numbers that represent an NFT that I hold. So that's really the only difference, is whether or not I'm owning something that is one of many, many when they're all the same, or whether there's something unique about it. Tokenization also supports this idea of fractional investing, which has huge applications in real estate. We'll cover that another time in great detail. But let's say that I, want to buy some gold, but to buy a bar of gold costs, just say it's $10,000, just making up a number for this point, and I don't have $10,000. I can't really take a knife and cut off a section of it. But with fractionalization, you could issue 1,000 tokens for this one bar of gold, and I could buy 10 of them. So it allows a group of people to own something together, kind of like shares of stock in a company, where you sort of have this one entity, and now there's many, many, many shares, and people, a bunch of people can buy those. And that is what fractional ownership refers to. And for high value assets, sometimes really high-end art, like famous artists, millions of art that costs millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars, where you might not be in a position to buy one of those in entirety, you can buy a fraction of it via this tokenization process. And this also kind of fits into this idea that the gold that these countries and central banks have been accumulating will likely be used as collateral for things. It could be collateral for loans via the bond market. It could be collateral for a currency. But that's sort of the idea here when we talk about returning to a gold standard or an asset-backed money system. I don't think anyone's referring to gold being used on a daily basis in stores where we're going to have little tiny gold coins that will pay for things. It's really that this gold is being used to back the money system. It is being used as collateral, so that when someone issues a currency, if you don't trust them or know them, and instead of just them promising that they're not going to, issue too much like we've seen in the fiat system, there would be collateral that would be audited by a third party. So Chainlink is one of the companies in the space that has an audit process that is set up that every day it will go and I think it's every day, but it will go and verify that yes, the gold is still there, the amount is still there. We have smart contracts that are updating it. We see this cool idea with the blockchain also in the data storage world, where if I'm storing data somewhere, a smart contract will check every day to make sure that the data is where it's supposed to be. And that will work as well in these these tokenized asset systems, where you need to be sure that those assets are still there, and you don't necessarily want to take the word of the issuer of the currency or the bond. So you need a third-party auditor who comes in. Now, we've seen corruption in this world, and so it's going to take diligence on everyone's part to make sure that these auditors are truly objective, and that we are seeing transparency with the fact that if I'm issuing a currency and I say I've got $100 million worth of gold, that I really do have that, and I haven't issued the currency and then gone and taken the gold and done something else with it. So that is legitimately one of the concerns that the Bitcoin community has raised, that you have to, again, trust that people are going to do this. However, we have to have some sort of trust in the money system, and we just want to minimize the risks and create systems. And this, again, is my sort of professional opinion. We need to create systems that ensure transparency, audits are actually effective, so that we can return to sound money, remove this factor of inflation that has plagued the world so much. And one great way to do that is by leveraging this idea of tokenized gold. All right, we'll see you in the next video.